Hello and welcome back to War Thunder and to the tank review on the T-54-47. This Soviet monstrosity of a medium tank is very controversial amongst the War Thunder player base, and rightfully so. I will give you a full rundown about the statistics on this tank, together with a comparison to its main opponents on the battlefield. I will point out its strength and how to use them effectively on the battlefield, and if you have no interest or access to this tank yet, I will give you tips and tricks how to deal with this tank quick and effectively, followed up with multiple ace tank gameplays, so stay tuned. The T-54-47 and me have quite a history. I have a deep love-hate relationship with this brutal tank. Normally I would not give such a word to a tank, but this tank is rather exceptional. When facing it, and I face it a lot, not just in arcade but also in realistic battles, I hate to face it, and when playing it myself, it is just a joy to walk over my opponents. This tank leads me to a hyper-aggressive and reckless playstyle, one of many reasons why the kill to death ratio of this tank appears not to be particularly exceptional. From the first look, this tank seems to be nothing spectacular, but it is not so obvious why this tank is, in my opinion, off the scale. In a nutshell, this tank combines the best medium tank armor in the game with a reliably deadly gun, decent mobility for nearly no drawbacks. The armor on this tank, as mentioned, is just ridiculous. I often put myself in front of multiple opponents and just count the bounces on non-penetrating hits. While technically this tank can be defeated by nearly any tank it faces, the reality on the battlefield, in combination with a decent tank commander and especially in medium tank wolf packs, is nearly unstoppable. It just suppresses enemy flanking actions, can act as a heavy tank and a bunker at the same time. It is very versatile, as I mentioned, and achieves this with a limited amount of tools. The main tool of this tank is the brilliant 100mm D10T cannon, which can deal effectively with any opponents this tank will face. Just under the most uncommon situations, this tank will let you down. For me, the main criticism I have with this tank is that I can even stand in front of a Yak Tiger and have a very good chance of bouncing its shell, while at the same time having overall better armor than a lot of the heavy tanks at this battle rating, and especially much better mobility than them, and I even can keep up with other nations' medium tanks that just lack the reliable one-hit capability, which I still have in this tank. Within War Thunder, how the game works in combination with the need to go for objectives such as cap circles and game mechanics and my aggressive playstyle, this tank is very, very good. If you can't make it work, I have to wonder how you played Russian tanks so far, because this tank doesn't give you anything really new. It just takes every positive aspect from its predecessors and just maxes them out. In fact, this tank's armor is so good that the following two T-54 variants, namely the 49 and 51 variant, together with the T-62, have effectively weaker armor and have to fear again the firepower of a Yak Tiger or a Mouse. But enough of the glory spam. Let's begin with the tank review and let's have a look at the armor first. So the armor of the T-54-47 is second to none amongst medium tanks, especially the hull. 120mm on the lower glacis angled at 53 degrees. Even here you will reliably bounce Yak Tiger shells. Don't get fooled by the effective thickness of 238mm. It's the angle that reliably lets you bounce so many shells. Also, the upper hull has no weak spot and offers again 120mm, but even further angle at 61 degrees. The effective thickness depends on the actual angle you look at, and when you are at the same level, 220, 244, or even down to just above 200mm. Now, it might give you the chance to use the first pattern and try to penetrate it with heat shells. As you know, heat shells work really well against sloped armor and have nearly no penetration loss compared to the angle they interact. They have no normalization, so to speak. But you have to be slightly above your enemy, because remember, 210 millimeters against this, it's close, it's really close. And then we come to the real pain train, and that the turret is. Now, on the stat card, we can see 200 millimeters of turret front armor, and it is true, but it is always angled. You never have really 200 millimeters flat out. The weakest spot that I can make out is 210, and you can see from these parts that appear to be flat, okay, 209 is the least I can make out. If you go off by just a few centimeters, you are immediately in zones with over 300, 400, even above 500 millimeters of active angle. And there are even some overlays of the rather flat armor. And even directly around the gun, we have a deep angle. I put off the armor view. Look at this sloping and angling. Okay, well, this offers so many good sides that there has to be one bad side, and I give you the tip right now: try to shot trap it. With every AP or APHE shell, try to aim under the gun so that the shell ricochets downward through the 30 millimeters of roof armor. But we're not finished yet. So the side armor is 80 millimeters thick, which is the very best amongst all medium tanks in the game. This is the same side armor as of the Tiger, the King Tiger, and even the Yak Tiger. Although they have a bit angling going on. You can see there is no angling going on. Then we have the side armor of the turret. And you might think, well, surely this is a weakness. Well, no. 160 millimeters. This is 10 millimeters more than on the turret of the T-52, which has one of the best non-Russian turrets in the game. This is just second to the Russian heavy tanks, such as the IS-3 and the IS-4. And you can see there is also a lot of angling going on. So be very careful where you aim. Look at this. You can ricochet downwards. I again pull off the armor view. A lot of angling going on, and even the turret ring here is 125 millimeters thick from the front. The turret ring is 200 millimeters thick. So just think about this. From the side armor, this is very difficult to see, but the turret ring extends actually the broadness of the hull. So there is a chance when he angles that you can penetrate here with a relatively low penetrating shell. Yeah, but you're taking your chances. And yeah, from the front, as I mentioned, the turret, you take your chances. Technically, you can penetrate it with the long 88, and it will happen from time to time. But it is very difficult to reliably hit. That's what I'm talking about. And look, I go here, and suddenly the Yak Tiger becomes problems, and there it bounces. There it bounces, there it doesn't go through. It's very difficult. Another weak spot from the front is the cupola. And this is the lifeblood of every opponent that you face, especially Germans when you get down-tiered. And you get down-tiered a lot. You have a battle rating of 7.3. You see King Tigers, Panther 2s all the time. And 100 millimeters of cupola armor. You still have to aim pretty carefully, and you might even bounce here, or when you hit the roof, you just go away. It seems like 1.63 has not changed the effectiveness of the roof armor. You still have here an auto bounce or auto ricochet zone, but when you hit here the cupola and you ricochet downwards, you do tremendous amounts of damage. Now let's talk to the end. The rear is slightly better for your opponents. This is the part where you really show that you're a medium tank. You just have 50 millimeters of armor despite some angling. I mean, especially here you can again letting some shells disappear, but also 45 millimeters of rear armor. You're vulnerable for enemy AAA fire from the rear. So what about the interior? Well, it's looking like a relatively modern layout. It shares its this layout with the T-54-100, all the other two T-40 54s, and also the T-62. We have this fuel tank here and here, together with this very prominent and famous MREC here on the left-hand side. We also have the driver, the gunner, and the commander sitting nearly in one line here on the right-hand side, together with the loader on the left-hand side. We have a very big transmission and engine together with the fuel tank here in the back of the tank, and I just have to say they save the crew from a lot of shrapnels when you get penetrated from the rear. One thing that I have to mention is you just have 34 shells for the 100mm, and this is by far the lowest amount of ammunition amongst all medium tanks. And you can see you have this big 20-round ammunition rack here, and then you have also ammunition here, those 2 shells here, even this 1 shell here, and those 7 shells here. So you might remove 8 shells to clean out the turret to give you more survivability. But it really depends on if you're in an up tier or a down tier. The survivability of this tank when get penetrated is not too high. It's a really close crew compartment. One turret hit might just not ignite ammunition, but kills 3 of the 4 crew members, which leads to an instant death if you're not playing arcade and you are not having the crew replenishment already researched. Yeah, and then we come to the mobility. And the mobility again is something, I will leave this picture right here. In arcade it is very, very competitive, but I will compare the mobility to some of the opponents in realistic. But same goes for arcade, but I will specifically name the realistic stats. So this is actually the second lightest medium tank compared to all other nations. Just 36 tons, and it features also the weakest engine amongst all medium tanks with 520 horsepower. This leads to a rather weak 14.44 horsepower to ton ratio, but the maximum speed is, let's say, average 50 kilometers an hour, and the reverse speed is, I have to say, the weakest amongst all medium tanks with 7 kilometers an hour. Overall, the mobility is mediocre, but it's not bad. But you really need the engine upgrades, the mobility upgrades to get the maximum out of this tank. But this goes for every tank in the game. But let's just compare the numbers to other tanks. 14.4 horsepower to ton ratio. That is far off from the Panther II and the Leopard, which have around 20 horsepower per ton, fully upgraded, and they also have higher top speed. The Panther 54 and the Leopard 65 kilometers an hour. But for the Leopard, I have to say this is just a theoretical top speed. I never have achieved it. Unlike with the T-54, if you give it a bit of hard terrain to run on, you will come very close to this top speed. The Centurion Mark 10 has actually a lower horsepower to ton ratio, and with just 12.55, and also a significantly lower maximum speed of just 35. That's medium, that's heavy tank niveau. But it has also a better reverse gear with minus 12 kilometers an hour. The M47 Patton is interesting. Even this tank, with much less armor, has 45.8 tons of weight, but has a stronger engine with 810 horsepower. That leads to a 17.7 horsepower to ton ratio and a top speed that is a bit lower with 47 kilometers an hour. But it features a reverse gear that is more than twice as fast with 15 kilometers an hour. So, amongst the medium tanks, the mobility is nothing spectacular. But I just showed you the armor, and the armor is spectacularly strong. So let's compare it to some of the heavy tanks, the mobility. The IS-3 has the same engine, 520 horsepower, but features 12 tons more of weight. That gives a reduced horsepower to ton ratio of 10.8 with a top speed of 40 kilometers an hour. The 10.5 King Tiger is twice as heavy, nearly, with 17.5 ton, but features also a very strong engine, actually the strongest in the comparison, with 900 horsepower. That leads to a 12.77 horsepower to ton ratio. Not too bad. And it also features the best top speed amongst the comparable heavy tanks with 42 kilometers an hour. The T-32, on the other hand, is also heavier, 54 tons, but features a slightly stronger engine with 770 horsepower, leading to a very comparable 14.26 horsepower to ton ratio. So the T-54 has nearly the same mobility all around than the T-32 and has, comparable armor. Just think about this. And that's a heavy tank. And we will compare the firepower later on. Now the T-32 has a very weak top speed comparable to the Centurion Mark 10 with just 35 kilometers an hour. The Conqueror here has 66 tons, 810 horsepower, and 12.27 horsepower to ton ratio, with the slowest top speed of them all, 34 kilometers an hour. So overall, I have to say that T-54, overall, mobility-wise and armor-wise, acts more like a heavy tank. Now, that brings me then finally to the firepower, and there is actually nothing too spectacular. Let's just have a look at the shells you have available. We have 3 different APHE shells, 1 APCR and 1 high explosive shell. The stock APHE shell, the BR412, features 210 millimeters at close range and up to 164 at 1000 meters. It works reasonably well against sloped armor and features 110.5 grams of TNT equivalent. That is more than you can get on the German 88, the long 88, which has around 108 grams of TNT equivalent, if I'm not wrong, so it's comparable. But this is a bigger shell, so it creates more fragments. At least that's the feeling I have. Then the first upgraded shell, the BR412B, just gives you a very insignificant amount of penetration, buff, so to speak. 250 millimeters, and at 1000 meters 167 with the same TNT equivalent. So I will come to this shell back in a moment. Then we have the best APHE shell, that's the BR412D. It features 235 millimeters of penetration, and at 1000 meters we still have 172 millimeters of penetration. But we have a slight reduction of TNT equivalent of just 103.7 grams. That is weaker than the long 88's high explosive filling, but it still works really good. The penetration at short distances is the very same as on the German long 88, and it just is a bit weaker at distance in comparison. Then we feature the BR412P APCR shell, which is completely useless as it features just 251 millimeters of penetration. The standard APCR penetration value within War Thunder throughout all the nations, except the British, is 270, 271 at close ranges. Yeah, and why would you use this shell that has over 20 millimeters less penetration than other nations' already useless APCR shell? I see absolutely no opponent that you might use this, except for the mouse at long range, but who shoots at the mouse at long range? And still with this shell you can penetrate the turret front of a mouse up to 200, 300 meters if you really want. Please remember the armor quality reduction factor of the mouse, which I mentioned in my mouse tank review. Yeah, the high explosive shell, 90 millimeters of penetration at all distances and angles, not really worth talking about. But let's just compare those stats to all other nations' tanks. But before this, how should you use your ammunition? Well, mostly I use the majority of shells of this BR412B. It has enough penetration, but has a little bit better high explosive filling, so it kills more reliably. And this is just, you know, I actually never see a real use for this shell, except if I have to duel King Tigers at long range, but you're doing something wrong when you do this in the first place. So, I will compare the firepower of the T-54 with some other medium tanks that I mentioned before with the mobility in terms of caliber, reload rate, shell capacity, gun depression, and turret rotation speed. And there are some surprising facts, because you might think, well, for this kind of armor and still a decent mobility, it might have significant drawbacks in the firepower, despite the shells. Well, actually, no. We have a 100mm D10T cannon, as I mentioned before, with a reload rate in my current state of 9.1 seconds and 8.6 seconds compared to, or for an ace crew. That is 21% lower than the Leopard's brilliant 7.1 seconds and 28% longer reload than the Centurion Mark 10 with its really good 6.7. But it features 14% better reload rate than the M47 Patton with 9.1 for an ace crew, and that has just a 90mm. And it is very comparable and just 0.1 second slower than the reload on the Panther II with its long 88. Now the shell capacity is with 34 by far the lowest. The Panther has 50 shells, the Leopard 60 shells, and both the Centurion Mark 10 and the M47 Patton II can carry up to 70 shells. Now what about the gun depression? Well, it has by far the worst gun depression with -4 degrees and 17 degrees of gun elevation. It shares this with all the other T-54s, and you know, the Panther II has 8 degrees of gun depression, so twice the amount of gun depression, but just 15 degrees of gun elevation. The Leopard, the Centurion Mark 10 and the M47 Patton have gun depressions ranging from 9 to -10 degrees and gun elevations from +19 to +20 degrees. Surely this heavily armored tank has a very slow turret rotation speed. Well, fully upgraded, not so much. 12.2 degrees per second of turret rotation speed is comparable to the Panther II with its 11 degrees per second. It is not really that much slower than the 16.1 degrees of the Centurion Mark 10, but just fails in comparison to the M47 Patton's 21.4 and the Leopard 22.6 degrees per second. I have to say, there is one tank that has significantly lower turret rotation speed than the T-54-47, and that is the T-54-51 with just 9.4 seconds. But this tank has also weaker armor and practically the same gun, but granted it can research better shells. Now what about the heavy tanks in this comparison? Well, their reload rates are extremely long. The IS-3 with its 122mm gun has at best 20.8 seconds reload. The 10.5cm King Tiger features a 44% longer reload with its 10.5cm gun. You know, the caliber difference is not too different, but it's two-staged ammunition. So we have 15.4 seconds for an ace crew, and you don't have that much more effective penetration. The T-32, for its two-staged 90mm ammunition, needs a reload of 14.5 seconds. That is a 40% longer reload. And the Conqueror, with its 120mm gun, also needs 14.9 seconds. So when you want to compare this tank to heavy tanks, it has definitely the advantage in reload. Now, also the gun depressions are mostly better than on the T-54, except on the IS-3, which just features 3 degrees. And all the turret rotation speeds are also better throughout the King Tiger, the T-32 and the Conqueror with 15.4, 21.1 and 16.5 degrees per second. Just the IS-3 stays back with 8 degrees per second. So yeah, that gives you a good impression of where this tank stands. Now, there is one thing that I have to say. The T-54 doesn't have access to ultra-high penetrating shells such as APDS or heat shells. On the other hand, it would be completely overpowered if it had access to this kind of ammunition. And this is some kind of natural balancing factor. But does this tank really suffer at the hands of by the lack of having this ammunition? I don't think so. I mean, your main job is to flank, and for flanking shots, this kind of penetration is good enough, and there is just nothing wrong with this tank. For my playstyle, for my experience, I think APHE is all you need. Together with the fantastic armor, you can actually bring the firepower to work. And just in the long run, you will suffer by the lack of ammunition capacity. But if you really have needed your 34 shells up, you had a pretty good game. Respectively, if like a third of your shells went into enemy tanks, which is also, a ratio that should be better if you played. So, I think that's enough theory crafting. I've shown you a lot of arcade gameplay in the background. So now I think it's time for the realistic gameplay. But for the realistic gameplay, I have to say, it was not easy to record a good game. Because if you had a good game with a medium tank, you don't get shot at too much. You surprise the enemy, you give it flanking shots, you do your stuff and give them side shots, surprising them, disappearing again. And, this tank can do it like any other tank or medium tank in the game. It has the mobility for it. On the other hand, you need to stay on flat ground. And so this tank plays completely different, effectively, at least when I played, than to the other medium tanks. Because other medium tanks have actually to fear heavy tank guns or other medium tank guns, especially from this tank, as it has a very high one-shot capability for a medium tank. And the thing is this, how to play this tank? Well, you angle it a little bit, but not too much. And you try to stay on flat terrain where you don't have to use any kind of gun depression. And you just rock forwards and backwards with your tank. You just deny the enemy the clear shot. You wiggle your turret around, and you make your shots count. And when you do this, this tank serves you very, very well. Now, this tank is technically not undefeatable. And as I mentioned, the Commander's Cupola is a target where when you penetrate there with an APHE shell, you can one-shot it, especially when your opponent doesn't take out the ammunition rack in the back of the turret. You can also shot trap him. This is, by the way, a method of taking it out that I realized is so much more common in realistic battles. But I have never died to it in arcade. And one of the reasons might be that, in arcade you have this aiming cross that gives you the different colors, green for penetrating, yellow for maybe, and red for not. And when you aim here, it gives you green, you pull the trigger and, the shell misses by a few centimeters and just doesn't penetrate. Nobody that aims here sees here a green light and doesn't pull the trigger. But if you do it, especially directly under the gun, the shell might ricochet downwards through the 30 millimeters of roof armor. By the way, 30 millimeters, you are at least safe from normal cannon fire and machine gun fire. Rockets, small caliber rockets might have a problem, 80 millimeter rockets, something like this, but everything bigger will very likely kill you. So now I think it's time for the realistic gameplay. Now you might seen it in the beginning that I mixtured a little bit of realistic gameplay and a little bit of arcade, but I think mostly it was arcade, showing you indeed, my hyper aggressive playstyle, my, ridiculous results in it. I mean, which other medium tank could do this? None, yeah. But now for a few minutes you're already admiring the best purely result orientated gameplay so far. In realistic, it is here on Karelia, and at first you might think Karelia, the first map ever in there to be in ground forces. It saw numerous changes, but that's not the thing. It was always very hilly, a lot of dips, a lot of ridge lines, hills, and also mostly the cap circles are in rather hilly terrain. Now I'm going here into the shortcut, I'm feeling very comfortable. Sadly there is nobody watching the corner, so I have to wait a little bit for my next kills. And I actually played with the thought, should I try, if I get the same result, playing like the Sherman Firefly, the tank review. I looked around, I saw this tank, he paid no attention, and boom, thank you very much. And there I'm just choking for position, or chucking for position. My English lets me down. Yeah, I know this is a very lengthy tank review. It took me like half an hour to just finish talking about this tank and comparing it and whatever, but I think it's really necessary. I hope I reduce the time in future tank reviews again to a rather normal degree. Oh, Centurion Mark 10, lower glacis. He took out the front ammo rack, didn't help him too much. Yeah, and then I reverse up this hill. Now, I know 7 kilometers an hour is not very fast. Oh, that was a T-29, didn't remember that kill. Well, whatever. My 4th kill so far. And, 7 kilometers an hour is not too fast, but it's not really neck-breaking slow. It's nearly twice as fast as, 5th kill, that's the ace, by the way. Like for a Panther. And unlike the Panther, I have much more reliable frontal armor. Yes, I know Panthers are at a lower battle rating, but you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. And the reason why I reverse up this hill is because I want to present my frontal armor towards an enemy. I go up this hill, and I'm just waiting. Just observing. And the question is this spawn camping? Not quite, but it's close to. I get the criticism. But I had to get a gameplay, orientated on results, so I can show that this tank is truly not just capable of eating the damage, but also dishing it out. Now, a problem in realistic battles, I find, is that when you have a gameplay with a lot of kills, the majority of kills are on tanks that are not really equal to you in terms of battle rating, or there are AAA vehicles such as this one here. Immobilizing him, shredding the crew with machine guns, that's good enough. 6th kill. And a reverse back into cover. I'm observing this hill. I always had the feeling that there's still somebody up there. I hear the plane going by, and I thought he has seen me, but no, he has not, and the snapshot was not quite good enough. And he pulls up hard, so no chance for me to get him. I mentioned the gun elevation with just, 17 degrees. It's not quite good enough. It's not terribly bad, but it's not spectacular either. Mostly you don't talk about gun elevation, do you? Now I saw this fella here trying to climb the hill, and I'm not sure if he has seen me or not, but he reverses. I pre-aim. And I have no idea where this shell went, but it seems like he was killed by a King Tiger P. No, he is still there. He definitely has not seen me. So I just wait, and he goes back again. This time I make sure that I hit, critical hit, bit of machine gunning the commander, but he was already down. Just waiting for the next shot, straight through the front plate, 7th kill. So, that's basically the game. I don't get any more kills. And I think I use this, to just give you the mistake here. What gets me killed. Now I mentioned it in the beginning. When I take on multiple opponents at once, I can't kill them fast enough before somebody, just disables me and finally kills me. I'm rushing in way too hard. I'm feeling way too overconfident. I'm having way too much fun in this tank doing it. I'm not going for a good kill to death ratio in this tank. Otherwise, I would play it like any other tank. But it feels like kind of a waste if you do so. Now, I wanted to rush this enemy tank there, but he was already taken out. And then I tried to get up there and, tried to get a different angle on the spawn. But do you remember when I said that I heard some enemy tank there? Yeah. He really camped hard his own spawn. He was just 10 meters away. Undoubtedly, he heard me, and he finished me off with a hash shell from the side. So quite a nice result there. And then I, get into the I-153P, the best, most ridiculous spy plane in the game. Just saying. Now I hope that you have waited up until this point. I gave you also a timestamp in the beginning of the video that leads you to this final verdict. I think this is a very, very good tank. Look forward to it. It brings nothing new to the table, but on the other hand, it is a very reliable tank. And if you know how to use Soviet guns up until this point, you might just enjoy the protection that the armor gives you. Now, don't get too overconfident like I just told you, it kills you, because this is not a magic tank, but is just simply the best medium tank, protection wise. And the gun just simply is very reliable. I think in realistic, this tank is better in terms of firepower than in arcade, because in arcade there is a lot of spam of Russian tanks, and facing other Russian tanks with this gun is then a bit, difficult. This is where also the complaints from German tankers come in, because their 88 is very powerful, and suddenly they face, those higher tier Russians, and they just simply can't penetrate or just keep bouncing. Despite, the stats in the garage, as I mentioned in the tank review. Other medium tanks at the same or higher battle rating, especially American mediums, have a damn hard time as long as they don't have access to either hash or, for example, the M60s, which they have to research, or the patterns, as long as they don't have the high penetrating heat, not the 210, but the 320mm penetrating heat. And it's a very, very long and painful way up until they get there. And as long as they don't have the sight, they don't have an easy shot. Technically, it's possibly. Practically, it's very unlikely. Let's put it that way. And that is the problem with this tank. That in itself, it's so easy to handle and so forgiving, while other tanks really have to put so much effort and evidently so much money into their tanks to have an equal chance of taking it out. And then, this tank has practically the same performance when being stock. This is one of the least frustrating tanks to take out. And this is the point where I will give you the final summary of tips and tricks how to take this tank out. First of all, if you have access to hash, aim for the front plate, especially the crew compartment. Hash doesn't care about angles so much up until it bounces at extreme angles because the fuse doesn't get really contact with the armor itself. Then big HE shells from 120, 122, 128 millimeter shells. For example, on the M103, it's HE shell. From the Jagdtiger, the Maus, E100 or the Sture Emil, those big German caliber shells, straight to the turret face. Same goes if you play arcade and you have either a KV2 or a 122 millimeter gun or howitzer. The HE has enough penetration to hit the turret front and splash downwards into the ammunition rack and the fuel tanks, and it's very reliable. The same goes for relatively big caliber, let's say from 88 millimeters onwards. You can reliably shot trap this tank down into the hull, and then you one-shot it. And the next thing is, when this tank moves and turns his turret and makes aiming very hard, try to disable it. Pull the tracks, track it. Try to flank it. Try to lay ambushes. Try to use the lack of its gun depression, make advantage of your strength in return. It might not help you all the time, but don't give up. Maybe retreating in some cases is the more sensible thing to do. And then when you have it side, and this is a very strong side armor, but you have very, very good chances of taking it out from the side. So that's it for this tank review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comment section what you think about this tank. Give this video a like if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more. And we will see each other in the skies and on the battlefields of War Thunder.